Hey, gorgeous, and welcome to this episode of the Magnetic Woman Show. I had another episode content planned for you. However, I could not help myself in making this episode around how the TV show Tell Me Lies has helped heal me more than any therapy ever did. Now, in this episode, there will be spoilers of the television show if you have not watched it. And I'm going to be honest with you. I had a friend of mine tell me to watch Tell Me Lies when season one came out, and I was uninterested because I'd heard what the show is about, like a toxic, manipulative relationship. And when season one came out, I had just ended a relationship like that. And I was like, I cannot watch this. It will be too much. It'll be too triggering. And honestly, I forgot about the show. And then I guess with the beginning of season three, it somehow kind of like came back into, I don't know whether it was recommended to me, when I was like via streaming or what. But I decided last week, I was like, you know what? Let me just watch it. Not only did I binge this show, right? And we're talking like staying up till 3 a.m. watching the show. Watching this show healed me in ways therapy never did. So, if you don't know the premise of the show, or maybe you've seen it, the premise of the show is this group of college students who are in their like freshman, sophomore year of college. The girls are, and the guys are junior, seniors. And it's set in the early 2000s. So, that's really important to understand. I think they get to college in 2006, which is around the time I went to college. I went to college in the fall of '05, right? And so we're talking like when Facebook was still just for only college students. You needed a .edu to sign up for Facebook, okay? There were no iPhones. Um there were, it was a very different landscape. There obviously was no TikTok. Podcasts were like not really a thing, okay? And it's about the dynamics within the friendships, and it's really about, in a lot of ways, the two main characters, Stephen and Lucy, and they're very toxic, chaotic, and narcissistically abusive relationship. So again, when I heard this a couple years ago, I was like, you could not pay me to watch the show. And yet here we are, binged it in a few days. I'm all caught up. Now, I've seen a lot of criticism about this show online, specifically on TikTok. People hate Lucy. And what that tells me is, I mean, this is not surprising, but people, this world is so deeply misogynistic. Okay. So the relationship that I was in was not to the degree of Stephen and Lucy for a lot of reasons. I personally believe that narcissism and more specifically like manipulative toxic relationships are on a spectrum. So in this show, especially with the character Stephen, we're seeing a very extreme um, end of the spectrum. What I loved about this show is he never hits her. And the reason why I love that is because even now in the year 2026, there is still so much where we discount and discredit psychological and emotional abuse. And it's like, well, if he didn't hit you, then it wasn't abusive. So I think Megan Oppenheimer, the creator and uh, director of the show, is brilliant in how she portrayed all of these things. But especially, I love the fact that Steven never hits her, and yet we can so clearly see this is a manipulative, toxic, and abusive relationship. And when I was in my last relationship, I went to therapy for a time, and I left therapy because I found that, so for me personally, I have done so much personal development. And I think this is true for a lot of women. Obviously, all the women that follow me, you're deeply into personal and spiritual development. And so it's very easy to intellectualize why other people are behaving the way that they're behaving. So I found myself doing that a lot in my last relationship. My ex would do something that would be extremely hurtful, that would be like something that normally I would probably be like, I would never put up with that. But I found myself intellectualizing and trying to figure out why he acted the way that he did, right? Like, let me get to the root of his trauma, his pain, not necessarily to excuse the behavior, but to understand it. And I found in therapy, when I would bring that into therapy, and my therapist was great, but she would also help me intellectualize this. And what I needed at the time was less intellectualizing of why my ex acted the way he acted and more like, how does that make you feel, Lauren? And do you think that is appropriate or okay in a relationship? Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Okay. And the reason why I think that manipulative relationships really are on a scale is honestly, I think most men are manipulative because in the patriarchy, men are taught that they're the default person, they're the standard. They're taught that their comfort, their emotions, their wants, their needs, their desires are the baseline, and everything needs to revolve around that. And in the patriarchy, we as women are taught to caretake men's emotions, egos, their wants, their needs, their desires, that our safety is dependent on the man that we're with, especially feeling good about himself. And especially the time that this show is written or is portrayed, the early 2000s, we have to think back to like the late 90s, early 2000s, where so many of the rom coms are about like loser men hating the women that they're with and that being a showcase of love. And you and I both know that that narrative of like a little boy picking on a little girl and it being like, oh, that means he loves you has been around for a long time. We have normalized abuse and manipulation in romantic relationships as some kind of declaration of love inside of the patriarchy. And I think a lot of men in the patriarchy are not shown, taught, nor do they ever learn on their own how to emotionally regulate, how to really like um feel good about themselves outside of manipulating things around them. And unfortunately my light went off. So we're just going to have to deal. Okay, hopefully it stays on now. Um they're like that's their adaptive behavior is to be manipulative to get what they want. All right, looks like we're going without a light, unfortunately. Sorry, YouTube. Okay. And women are taught to fawn and to caretake and to take care of men, their egos, their emotions, their wants, their needs, their desires. And so, and then when you're in personal and spiritual development, you have this added layer, at least this was the case for me, of intellectualizing why the other person is acting the way that they're acting. And it allows you to override your boundaries for compassion, override your boundaries for a sense of safety. So the reason why I say this show healed me is because we get to see from a very bird's eye view how the main character Steven operates in his manipulations, in his abuse, in his toxicity. And again, in watching the show, I've been seeing a lot of takes on social media and people saying like, this show gave me PTSD. And I am so fucking proud of myself because I'm like, wow, this really is an indication of how much work I've done on myself, that I was not triggered in any way watching this show, but I was able to have so much compassion, empathy, love for myself of how and why I acted and did things in the relationship that I did. And there were moments in watching Tell Me Lies where Steven will do something and Lucy reacts. She's over functioning, she's overcompensating because you see him get like everything's going fine, they're joking, whatever, and his face changes And I could still feel that in my body, that moment of like, oh shit, things are about to go sideways. And so things don't go sideways. Let me overfunction. Let me like overcompensate. Let me try and make him feel good because if he feels good, then he'll treat me better. Right. And again, I think a lot of that narrative, a lot of that dynamic is conditioned into us via the patriarchy. It's conditioned into us via religion. It's conditioned into us via media, especially again in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I was able to watch the show and be like, wow, of course I found myself losing a sense of self, losing my confidence. Of course I found myself shrinking. Of course I found myself really like pulling back in my business because every single moment that I, you know, did something amazing, inevitably, of course, in that kind of dynamic and pattern, an issue would arise, a fight would arise, a blowout would arise. And I think for me too, one thing again that was so healing in this show is in this show, every all of the other characters, at least the women, know and see that Steven is manipulative. In my real life, friends in my like physical reality where I lived were also friends with my ex. And they, maybe they saw it, but they were constantly like, he's such a great guy. Oh my God, he's so amazing. My ex has a career that is highly respected. So I think that actually gave him a lot of wiggle room in his behaviors, not just towards me, but in general, because people respected the position that he held professionally. And I think that if he had a different profession that maybe wasn't as like societally respected, people would have put up with his shit a lot less. But um anyways, so I got and because in Tell Me Lies, we're watching again from a bird's eye view, and you're watching how Steven's interacting with every single person. It's so clear. Oh my God, he's so abusive. Oh my gosh, he's so toxic. And for me, as a woman who was in it, it was like deep down intuitively, of course I knew it wasn't right. And I was running on a lot of deep conditioning. I was running on some wounds, yes, of course. And I was really approaching him in the way I approached myself, which was with like a lot of compassion, a lot of forgiveness, trying to figure out why he was acting the way he was acting. I remember one moment in my relationship or, in the past relationship where he was doing something and he blamed it on past trauma. And he and I had similar things happen in our lives. And it was this moment of clarity where I'm like, wait a second. I had basically the exact same thing happen to me, and I don't act like an asshole. And I don't use that as an excuse to act like an asshole. And again, I think that watching this show just so deeply healed any residual story of like, I was the reason, I was the cause, I could have done things differently or better. And again, the show's portrayal of Stephen and Lucy is very much an extreme, but I think it's a spectrum, and I think that in heteronormative relationships, especially with men who have not done deep work unpacking their internalized patriarchy and misogyny, they are manipulative. That's what they learn to do and be to get what they want. And we as women are deeply conditioned. We're talking 2,000 years worth of conditioning because our safety and survival has been dependent upon being appeasing and appealing to men. We have this deep conditioning to fawn, to overfunction, to caretake, to make them feel good, to like instead of bringing the fullest expression of who we are the second that they are emotionally dysregulated, we back off because they can't handle it. And so when I see a lot of criticism of Lucy on the internet, I think one, most people don't clearly are just misogynistic. Two, most people clearly do not understand trauma. Three, most people with that criticism either have not been in a relationship like this and or have not admitted to themselves that they've been in relationships with toxic and abusive men. Um, because I think in the patriarchy, that type of toxicity, manipulation, chaos is encouraged for the longest time. And we're talking up until like the last few years, was seen as love. This idea of like, if I'm just a safe space for him, then that'll be a safe relationship. If I just give him the time and space to heal, if I'm his peace, then he'll choose me, which goes back to this idea too of like the woman that he changes for, being the one, being the woman that he changes for, being quote unquote enough, which I mean the goalpost of enough is constantly moved, being enough so that he changes, so that he shows up better, so that he treats me the way that I deserve. That idea of like this special one is, I think, one of the most toxic and damaging ideas for women in relationships. And it keeps us in this cycle of constantly trying to prove our worth and our enoughness, constantly trying to be the one that he picks, that he chooses, that is enough so that he shows up differently. And what we see in Tell Me Lies is the show, starts off like 2015, they go back to 2007, and it goes back and forth. In 2015, this man is the exact same. The exact same. And unless this type of person, the Stephen DeMarcos of the world, go through deep and intensive therapy, and I don't even know if therapy would work for him because he's clearly like antisocial personality, psychopath, sociopath, narcissist. But for your like more mainstream manipulative men, we'll say, unless they go through deep, 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 deep therapy, nothing is going to change. And so, again, I think for me, watching this show, I was able to see how, because I've talked about this already, I've held shame around having been in that relationship, in how I was treated, in staying, in how small I got, in how it impacted my business, and how it impacted my confidence. And what I was able to see while watching Tell Me Lies was that everything I did was trying to maintain a sense of safety and connection. And I was just doing it in the best ways that I knew how at the time. Everything that I did, how small I feel like I got, how I feel like I let, you know, I'm not going to let my business go, but I stopped seeing myself as the woman and leader I know myself to be in my business as a way to stay safe in the relationship, as a way to not be punished. And yes, it took me about, well, it's been over 2 years now to be able to watch the show, and being able to watch the show 2 years out and being like, wow, I'm not triggered. It's been so healing. I have so much compassion, love, and empathy for myself is really, really beautiful. And again, I think the director, I think Megan Oppenheimer does such an incredible job of portraying really how all the ways that men are hurtful, manipulative, and toxic in romantic relationships in the patriarchal culture, because we see with other characters as well, their interactions with men. There's a lot of manipulation that goes on. And again, it's easy from the outside to be like, well, I wouldn't act that way, and I would have never, and oh, I would have clocked that bullshit, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, you think that, but one, it's usually not as obvious. Two, when you're in it, it it's not coming out in like 6 episode seasons, you know what I mean? It's coming out subtly and slowly, and it's activating. I think especially in women, we talk about trauma responses being fight or flight, and I think for most women our typical trauma response is fawn. It's coming out in ways that we fawn. It's coming out in ways that we are trying to make the other person feel better, because so many of us are just like loving, compassionate, empathic beings, and that trying to make the other person feel better over setting our own boundaries or over expressing our own emotions creates this dynamic little bit by little bit by little bit. And I have said this again and again and again. There is one thing for us as women that is like our biggest blessing and our biggest barrier. We are so fucking highly adaptable, right? So it's easy in relationships. Oh, you know, not even necessarily using my ex as an example, but just like in a relationship with him, he does this, it's hurtful, it's harmful. Okay, well, you know what? Maybe like I just won't do that thing next time because that seemed to cause friction or tension. Okay, that's fine, right? And then it's like little bit by little bit, we're not doing these things, we're not talking about these things, we're not expressing ourselves in this way in our relationship. But okay, I can do it with my friends or in this way. It's fine, 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 until you're left feeling like a shell of yourself, feeling like a shell of who you know yourself to be. And then the shame. And again, the criticisms of Lucy are just this like microcosm of the macrocosm. The societal narrative is blaming the woman for being in a relationship instead of blaming the man for being toxic and abusive. And we could sit here and debate all day, like taking personal responsibility, radical responsibility. And there's a time and a place for that. But this larger societal narrative that, like, Lucy is as bad as Steven, or, you know, like a woman who is being constantly traumatized in a relationship should know better, do better, pick better, is so misogynistic when the burden needs to be laid at the feet of these men. And this is why decentering men, for me, has also been one of the most radically healing experiences of my life. And I know the title of this is like How Tell Me Lies Healed Me More Than Therapy. And it has. It's healed things and places and, you know, belief patterns I didn't even know I still was hanging on to. And decentering men has been at the core of that. I think that I was able to watch this show not re-traumatized, not triggered, and really get a healing experience from it because I have decentered men, because I have already been breaking down and pulling apart these dynamics in from my past relationship, from relationships in general, from dating in general, of how we're conditioned as women to show up, how we're conditioned as women to caretake, to overfunction, to overcompensate, how we're conditioned to be like, oh, well, men just like don't know any better, and they like, you know, don't have the emotional capacity that we as women have, and like they're more like logical creatures, and all the bullshit, all of it. And so much of it is perpetuated in patriarchal polarity content, which is the podcast that we'll be doing next. That was what was going to be the podcast today. But I couldn't help myself because I've been, again, binge watching Tell Me Lies, and we're getting ready for the last, like, I think 2 episodes of this series. So, again, what I want to say is whether or not you watch the show, it kind of doesn't matter. What I want you to understand and take home is that from where I sit, a lot of heteronormative relationships where one or both people have yet to unpack internalized patriarchy and misogyny play out toxic, chaotic, and manipulative cycles, often which the men being manipulative, because in the patriarchy, men are conditioned to believe that they're the standard. What they want, what they need, what they desire, how they think, how they view things is the standard. And anything that deviates off of that is wrong. typically a woman's perspective, right? A woman's experience, a woman's emotions is wrong. So then we, as women, overfunction, over justify, overcompensate, over explain, like try and do everything we can to make this poor man's emotions feel so he feels good. Because we also know, like, when somebody feels good about themselves, they're going to treat others better. So then we're like, okay, great. I want to be treated better. I'll make him feel better about himself. But that's not how this works. Not in a lot of heteronormative relationships, and not with men whose default, whether they know it consciously or not, is manipulation. And so, what I would love for you to leave here with, above all else, is all of the times that you have fawned, that you have overridden your boundaries for compassion, specifically for a man. All of the times that you have overcompensated, overfunctioned, gotten smaller, adapted, but at the cost of yourself. Give yourself so much grace, love, and compassion. You were truly doing your best. And that allowed you to survive. Probably not thrive, but to survive. And you get to choose different things moving forward, right? So if this episode resonated with you, and if you're also holding a lot of things from past relationships, or you're maybe in a relationship where some of these dynamics are playing out, but at the end of the day, you're like, I want to be the woman who is self centered, who's the center of her own universe. I kind of feel like what we're doing, we're moving into this space and phase where it's like where the church was around the Renaissance, like the Catholic Church, where before it believed that the solar system revolved around the earth, right? That's what the patriarchy is. We're told that the entire system has to revolve around men. And you and I are like the Renaissance scientists that are like, no, actually, the universe revolves around the sun. And we're like, actually, our lives, our own individual universe needs to revolve around ourselves. Hence the self centered woman. So if you're at that threshold where you're ready to step even more into the self-centered woman, I would love to invite you to join me for a threshold intensive. See this as your sacred initiation into being a self-centered woman. Okay. So there's two options for this intensive: virtually, which we get to do it, you're in the comfort of your own home, or 2 days in person. The in-person ones are like a magical, luxurious solo retreat for yourself. Everything is customized to you. These intensives are 25% off until the 17th of February, for like a week when this comes out. And they really are this deep initiation. This, like, women like us in ancient times, we would have gone to mystery schools. We would have gone out into the woods together to move through these initiations, right? You would have attended, or would have gone to a priestess or a witch or some kind of feminine shaman to help initiate these deeper energies, archetypes, layers. And that is not baked into the cake to modern society, at least not at the moment. I'm working on making that even more accessible to everybody. But that's what this is. This is that ancient call, that ancient remembrance of a time when these death and rebirth portals, these thresholds, these transitions were not just common, but they were revered. And they were revered in a way that you were held, you were led, you were in community for them. So if you would like to claim one of the threshold intensives, you can go to magneticwoman.com/threshold. And again, there's 2 day in person, and we have some different cities where that's available, or virtual. If you haven't watched Tell Me Lies yet, go watch it. You'll probably be as hooked as I was. If you don't want to watch it, you don't have to watch it. Hopefully you found this podcast helpful in some capacity. And if you did, please make sure to leave a 5-star review, share it on social media, tag me. I really think that these themes are so important for us as women as we move into this new phase of humanity, right? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not like here to call it New Earth or the 5D ascension or whatever. A lot of that gives me like rapture vibes that I just like don't agree with. But I do think that we are evolving so much and so quickly as humanity, and we're watching patriarchy crumble in so many ways. And it's really important that we name, that we identify, that we label the dynamics in relationships that have held women back, that have stifled us, that has have siphoned our energy, so that we get to choose a different way and we get to be in different relationships if we choose. All right, my loves, I'll see you next time.